All right, and we're live. Assalamu alaikum, greetings to all. My name is Ermin Sinanovic. I am the Executive Director of the Center for Islam in the Contemporary World at Shenandoah University, and I will be your host today in our latest CICW book talk with Dr. Hikmet Karcić on his book, Torture, Humiliate, Kill, Inside the Bosnian Serb Camp System. Dr. Karcić, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I'm going to just give a brief introduction about the center and about the book, and then we're launching to our conversation with the author. So the Center for Islam in the Contemporary World at Shenandoah University is a nonprofit organization registered in the United States. We are affiliated with Shenandoah University, and we are dedicated to promoting better understanding of Islam in the contemporary world. You can learn more about our center and about our activities at our website, which is www.contemporaryislam.org. That is contemporaryislam, all one word, .org. Now, the book that we have today in front of us is really a remarkable book, but it's also not an easy book to read and digest. It's a book that talks about a very difficult topic, but it's also a landmark because I think it is the first really systematic treatment of this topic. Just as a reminder, in the summer of 1992, the Serbian forces and Bosnian Serb forces made an aggression against Bosnia and Herzegovina, which was at that time a newly recognized independent sovereign state. And as a result of the policy of ethnic cleansing and genocide, also created a system of camps that was similar to the concentration camps that we saw in Europe during the World War II by the Nazis. In these camps, all kinds of unimaginable torture, humiliation, and murders took place, including rapes of tens of thousands of Bosnian Muslim women and girls. As we are hearing the stories coming out today from Russia and the atrocities committed by the Russian forces against the Ukrainian people, including the first stories, unfortunately, of rapes of Ukrainian women and girls, this reminds us also of a horrible legacy of the aggression on Bosnia and Herzegovina. In this book, the author talks about this camp system that was established by the Bosnian Serbs, and he treats 4 different case studies into which we will go into a moment. Just briefly about Dr. Hikmet Karcić, he is a researcher at the Institute for the Islamic Tradition of Bosniaks in Sarajevo. He's also a genocide and Holocaust scholar based in Bosnia and Herzegovina. He was 2017 Auschwitz Institute Keene State College Global Fellow, and he has written extensively on genocide denial and atrocity prevention. Dr. Karcić is a sought-after commentator on international media outlets, and his articles covering far-right extremism and mass atrocities have appeared in a number of international renowned journals and magazines and newspapers. So once again, Dr. Karcić, welcome to our book talk. Let me now go into a sort of brief introduction and a question to you. And the question there's always the first question to ask of any author that is a guest of our book talk series is, why did you write the book and what is its main argument and why the title?
So basically, this book is a modified version of my PhD thesis, which I defended in 2018. Basically, the reason why I did this as a PhD topic was because this subject itself was virtually unknown, or to say that there was not any concrete research done regarding the camps which were functioning in Bosnia in 1982. The majority of the works which has been written about Bosnia so far has mainly focused on Srebrenica in 1995. And since the majority of the crimes committed during the Bosnian genocide happened in 1992, I wanted to somehow shed light on the events occurring within 1992 And the main institutions which the Bosnian Serbs used, the Bosnian Serb authorities used, were the camps. So that's why I focused on the camps. So that's the reason why I focused on that. And why the title? Well, while I was researching, reading, going through dozens and hundreds of documents on a weekly basis, I came across three main significant things, common dominators within the camps, and that is torture, humiliation, and murder and killings. So in the end, I decided to have a sort of very direct title inside the book, and to I wanted to have a title which directly tell the reader what the aim of the camp was.
Thank you so much. I think that serves as a really nice introduction to the rest of our conversation. So as a sort of a setup for the book and a background, especially for the people who did not grow up around, the former Yugoslavia and the unfortunate wars that took place in the 1990s, tell us a bit about the ethnic relations in Bosnia historically and prior to the aggression on Bosnia.
So Bosnia and Herzegovina was one of the federal republics of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was a communist state ruled by strongman Josip Broz Tito, a communist partisan. Out of all the countries in the former Yugoslavia, Bosnia was the most ethnically mixed, in the sense that there was no concrete majority in the country. So Bosnia was a mixed territory of Bosniaks, Bosnian Muslims, Bosnian Serbs, and Bosnian Croats. Bosnian Croats are Catholic, Bosnian Serbs are Orthodox Christian. And the neighboring countries are Serbia, which is predominantly Christian, and Croatia, which is Catholic. So Bosnia was somehow caught in the middle when the breakup of Yugoslavia occurred in the 1990s. That being said, the ethnic relations within the country itself in communist time were not that bad, actually, because at that time you had this state doctrine of brotherhood and unity, in which all Slavs were basically brothers, and that this Slavic membership was much more important than any ethnic. But with the fall of the Iron Curtain, the ethnic divides and the religious identities start to pop up from all over the Yugoslavia. And of course, with ethnically mixed communities, this divisions became much more polarized. That's exactly what happened in Bosnia. So towns which were more ethnically mixed became points of basically violence and hatred and so on. And of course, this hatred was not. This hatred came from across the border, basically, because this war was something which happened in Bosnia, came by an attack from Serbia itself. So Serbia wanted to create a great Serbian state, and they invaded Bosnia, similarly like Russia invading Ukraine right now. And so with the Russians right now saying that they are going to denazify Ukraine, Slobodan Milosevic, the Bosnian Serb dictator, the Serbian dictator in Yugoslavia, he claimed to be waging a war against Islamic fundamentalism and terrorism in Bosnia. So basically, that was the key propaganda tool which he used, and the whole entire Serbian membership and establishment using it to justify their atrocities committed in Bosnia. So yeah, basically, the ethnic relations in Bosnia and in Yugoslavia up to 1990 were actually quite good in comparison to other regions throughout the world. And for at least 50 years during communist time, there was it was a peaceful country, well situated between the east and west, and all of these federal republics, actually, most of them became points in which ethnic division came overnight, and Bosnia was one of the cases where it happened very drastically.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for pointing that out. And for those of us who grew up during that time, during the time of Yugoslavia, we do remember that yes, from time to time, there were some inter-ethnic tensions, but for the most part, the relationships were just as you described. And those of us who grew up during that time, we grew up in a very mixed environment. We had friends and classmates of all ethnicities and religions, and rarely, if ever, there was any kind of tension between us. But by the late 80s and with the fall of communism, those interethnic tensions started appearing or reappearing, as you correctly pointed out. Which brings me to the next question. Now, with the fall of communism, we have the introduction of a democratic system to Yugoslavia, to Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have first free elections after the fall of communism. And then in 1992, the war breaks out. So I want you to tell us briefly, how did the attack on Bosnia begin, and how did Bosnia feature within the greater Serbia ideology? You did mention a little bit of this in the answer to the earlier question, but I want you to be a little bit more elaborate on this.
So Bosnia voted for independence on 29th February or 1st March 1992. And within basically 24 hours, checkpoints and barricades were being set up throughout the country by Serbian proxy forces. This was done in the manner to give a sense of them being some sort of paramilitary local militias, but in reality they were well-organized, well-established Serbian soldiers who very similarly to Donbass in 2014, who started to slowly take over local municipalities and police offices, police forces throughout the country. And of course, they had the majority of these groups had the support of the Serbian Democratic Party, which was the largest Serbian nationalist party at the time, led by Radovan Karadzic. Again, Radovan Karadzic, the Bosnian Serb leader, was in direct control and contact with Slobodan Milosevic, the Serbian dictator. So basically, Karadzic at that time in 1992 was his proxy, and nothing was done without the knowledge of Serbia and Belgrade proper. So in that case, right after right after a few weeks, the official once Bosnia was recognized as an official state by the United Nations and by the European community and the US, Bosnia was attacked by Yugoslavia under the orders of Milosevic on 6th of April 1992. And all of the bordering towns along the Drina River, which is in eastern Bosnia, were attacked and taken over. This was a very strategic point for the Serbs because eastern Bosnia had a very large Bosniak population. So basically around 70% of that population along the Drina River Valley was Bosnian Muslim. And the Serbs knew that if they wanted to create a greater Serbian state, they needed to get rid of this population. That's why the crimes which were committed in these towns was so very brutal and sadistic, in a sense. And of course, as weeks went by, then town by town was being taken over by the Yugoslav army, who at the whole time was claiming that they were there keeping the peace, that they were not attacking anybody. So a huge machinery of propaganda and lies was being used by the Slobodan Milosevic regime, very similarly right now to the Putin regime with Ukraine. A lot of fake news, a lot of outright denial of very clear facts and evidence was being done by the Milosevic regime. So in the end, basically what we had was the longest siege in the history of modern warfare, and it is the siege of Sarajevo, which actually started on the 6th of April 1992 and lasted up to December 1995. And the whole entire eastern Bosnia cleansed basically of its Muslim population, along with all other areas wherever Muslims were a majority. They were entirely removed, along with the Bosnian Croat minority.
Thank you. So after this kind of setup, just to sort of get a refresher or reminder of how the war and aggression against Bosnia began. Now we can go into discussing pretty much the central concept that you introduced in the book, and that is the concept of collective traumatization. This is a central focus of your book. So tell us more about this concept of collective traumatization, and especially about the concentration camp.
Yeah, so basically my theory is that the Bosnian Serbs invented a new purpose for the camps, and this is called collective traumatization. In that sense that the Bosnian Serbs, the Bosnian Serb authority decided to collectively traumatize the entire Bosniak population to that extent that they would never return back to their homes. And this was done through a number of ways, such as ceremonial murders, sadistic, brutal tortures, sexual abuse, and rapes of not only women but also of men, the destruction of religious buildings, mosques, cultural heritage, and basically erasing their ever existence in these small local communities. Most of these crimes were committed by the local police and by the members of the reserve police force. So basically what this means is that the population, the perpetrators knew their victims very well, and the victims knew their perpetrators, because these are small communities of 10, 20,000, 30,000 people in these small towns, and basically everybody knows everybody. So when somebody who you know for a long time commits such a brutal crime, then you never have the will to ever turn back to that house or to that hometown. So there are cases where students kill their teachers, teachers kill their students, and things like that. And in that extent, in these in the long run, in the case of the camps, my argument is that the Bosnian Serbs, throughout the history of the camps, of the existence of camps, in the last 130 years, what you can see is that these camps, the institution of the camps itself has evolved for different purposes. And in the case of the Bosnian Serbs, you can see this element of collective traumatization. And this is different from, for example, the Stalin's gulags or the death camp to the Holocaust, things like that. So basically, each camp system throughout the world, just like the one right now for the Uyghurs, is very similar, but it's different. It's unique, basically.
Yeah. So if you could tell us more about, I'm glad that you mentioned the existence of camps in China. You know, the camps where the ethnic Uyghur population, which is pretty much Muslim population of China, according to reports, maybe even up to 2 million Muslims are being held in such camps. That for Chinese, as you already indicated, may have different purpose than, for instance, what the Serbs did in the 90s in Bosnia. So I know that this is very sensitive subject, but if you could tell us a little bit about some of the, maybe, are there any stories that stood out for you when you researched this book, of that violence, which is horrific already as it is, but when it's interpersonal in such way that the two people have known each other for a long time? Like you said, a neighbor killed or tortured a neighbor. They lived together next to each other for decades. Some people were classmates, went to school together, teachers and students taking revenge or remembering some small petty disagreement from 20 years ago, and now taking it out on that imprisoned population, the camps. Maybe if you could share something that stands out, not in terms of describing the brutality necessarily, but in terms of the impact and how it creates that traumatization that you talked about.
Well, I start off my book with one such example, and that is a case in Višegrad in eastern Bosnia, where in one school where schools were, and this is interesting, schools were mainly used as centers for detention. So the Bosnian Serbs did not build new camps. They used existing facilities and converted them into basically in Eastern Bosnia, in Višegrad, in one high school sports hall, around 300 women and children, mainly women and children, were being held inside, and some of the girls and women were raped. There were a few elderly men inside as well. And one night, there is a Bosnian Serb soldier who enters the sports hall and takes out an elderly man called Ibrahim, and he takes him out from the sports hall, and you can hear a scream, a scream from the outside. And the next scene is that the soldier comes back into the sports hall and throws his severed head among the women and children inside. So statistically, in a court proceedings, you would have a fact that day one man was killed inside a camp. If you talk to the people who were inside that sports hall at that time, what they remember is that severed head flying across the sports hall among 300 frightened women and children, not knowing what's going to happen next. So in this sense, I think this is a perfect illustration of that collective traumatization, and that's why I use it at the beginning of my book to explain that if the Bosnian Serb policemen or soldiers wanted to kill Bosniaks in total, they could have, inside the camps. They could have killed this elderly grandfather very quickly, with a shot in the head. But they decided to have some sort of ceremonial execution, which is very theatrical, very ceremonial, which has and I forgot to mention the most important part. Once the soldier threw his head among the people, he said, "This is your qurban." So using this Muslim terminology, showing that the perpetrators were very, very well familiar with Islamic terminology regarding the sacrifice of animals and so on. And this date coincided with Eid in 1992, so it was very close in those dates. So basically, you have those cases, and in my point of view, these ceremonial executions, which statistically were not that high, left a long-lasting transgenerational trauma on the whole entire Bosniak population in East Bosnia.
See, so basically the ultimate goal is to create that kind of memory and association with those very places, to drive the population out, not necessarily to kill them, to kill enough of them to scare the rest of them into leaving, and create enough association and trauma so that this population would never want to go back to these places, even though these were their ancestral homes that date back generations and centuries and centuries. And in that sense, from that point of view, it was a very efficient strategy, as we know from what happened during and after the war. So in the book, you talk about 4 case studies: Višegrad, which is in eastern Bosnia on the river Drina, on the Serbian border, basically; Prijedor, which is in northwest Bosnia; Bijeljina, which is northeast; and Bileća, which is in southeast Bosnia, part of Herzegovina. So tell us a little bit about these 4 cases, about these 4 camps that you study in your book. Draw some comparisons and parallels and differences. Were there differences among them? Are they similar? How did the perpetrators do what they did? And what was the outcome of these camps?
Yeah, so basically, first of all, just to make a short introduction, Bosnian Serb camp system did not have a efficient paper trail, so there was no concrete document stating, kill all Muslims or torture all Muslims and things like that. So in order to prove my theory, I had to prove it on the consequences on the terrain. So I wanted to show on these 4 case studies, which were geographically and politically distinct, to show this theory of collective traumatization, that it was one pattern policy which was throughout the country, basically. So that's why I took these 4 case studies. Prijedor, the reason why I took these specific case studies is that the Bosnian Serb political system started creating parallel institutions in 1991. They were so-called Serbian autonomous regions. And basically this was a way how the Bosnian Serbs prepared themselves for war. So they created small parallel institutions which were existing within the official state. And so I took these 4 towns, which belong to 4 different Serb autonomous regions, and which are also not only politically distinct, but also geographically to our country. So I wanted to show that in these 4 towns, throughout 3.5 years, you had the same exact pattern going on from Prijedor in northwestern Bosnia to Bileća in southeastern Bosnia. So basically, the similarities are the following. In each of these camps, what you can see is a large segment of torture, of rape, sexual abuse, of different narratives and rhetoric, which is very anti-Muslim, then very anti-religious, which is a lot of anti-Muslim bigotry as well. And what you can see is a very high level of dedication by the perpetrators in order to inflict pain on the detainees. So, for example, in places like Prijedor, this was the largest camp system which existed on a local territory in Bosnia and Herzegovina. You had 4 different camps which operated, where you had thousands and thousands of people going through these camps. And of course, the most infamous one was Omar's camp, a local mine converted into a camp where people were being tortured on a daily basis, not only by the guards, but basically whoever wanted to come in and do whatever they wanted with the local detainees, they could do so. So if you had, we mentioned earlier, petty disagreement or some sort of revenge, or raping the girl who never wanted to date you in high school, whatever you wanted to do, you could do in the camp. Basically, you had impunity to do whatever you wanted, basically. These camps were discovered on the 6th of August 1992. They were closed, but most of the people inside of these camps were transferred to other smaller hidden camps throughout the country. But for example, Bileća for me was very interesting because it's a virtually unknown case. A small town in southeastern Bosnia, very small, insignificant Bosniak population. But what you had there was, that you had around 30 Bosniak men who were captured sometime in April, May 1992, and were kept inside a police station up to September, October 1992. I mean, for me, what was fascinating was that the Bosnian Serb police never actually really wanted to either exchange them, to ask for ransom, imagine being there for basically 6 months inside a camp where the only thing the guards did these 30 men was beat them on a daily basis. They said and instances of throwing in tear gas and things like that inside a police station. So for me, these small towns, which are virtually unknown, presented a huge interest for me because this is far away from the public eye, far away from the interest, not only in Bosnia but also in Western academia. So that's why I decided to do Bileća as well, to show this pattern, very identical pattern throughout.
Thank you. So I think the world came to know about these camps. As you said, they were discovered in August 1992. The famous pictures that was even featured on the front cover of Time magazine of an emaciated Bosniak men, in one of those camps, I believe, near Prijedor. So tell us a little bit about that and the discovery, and what kind of impact did discovery of these camps have in the rest of the world, especially in the West, that was watching what was happening in Bosnia, but the Western countries are very unsure at that time, unlike now in Ukraine, when they are providing very strong support to Ukrainians, arming them, equipping them with weapons and whatnot. In case of Bosnia, there was this unwillingness, one can say, to directly help the Bosnians to defend themselves. So what was the reaction, what was the reception of this once the camps were discovered, and especially in the Western countries?
Well, firstly, the Bosnian government talked about the existence of camps since July, beginning of July 1982, but nobody really believed these reports. And finally, the proof came on 6th of August 1982 when British journalists entered Australia and Damascus. This was the proof, basically, which was being sought for. And many people at the time believed that this was going to end the war. But of course, it didn't. It did not end the war for many reasons. Firstly, the Serbian political establishment and propaganda was very, very strong. The Bosnian government did not have any allies for the world. They themselves did not have well-educated personnel who could, unlike the Ukrainians right now who prepared for war for the last years, the Bosnians did not. They did not have. They had very limited access to government resources, to funding, to public support. Not many people knew where Bosnia was on the map. So and of course, this was a period when right after the end of the Cold War. So nobody really believed that there were going to be camps in Europe again. So this was the most shocking part for everybody. People did not believe that such barbed wires set up on European soil after the Holocaust. So at the time, what actually did happen was that a lot of people were saved from the camps. A lot of civilians. These camps were very quickly shut down in a matter of 10-15 days. The men from the camps in Prijedor were transferred Croatia and went from there to Western Europe and to Australia and to the US. Whereas the other camps, smaller camps, which I mentioned earlier, they were unknown. They were far away from Western journalists, and we as the Bosnian state did not have access to information about these. So that was the difference, I think, between the war in Ukraine, where you had a very already polarized atmosphere. You had a war which was going on for a long time, similarly to the Nagorno-Karabakh war. People were well prepared and preparing themselves for war for a long time. Whereas in 1982, everything happened so very quickly that nobody actually, I think Bosnians themselves were very much confused by the situation that somebody would, detain them in a camp just for fun, basically. So, and of course, at that time, the Bosnian government did not have a strong media presence, did not have a strong diplomatic corps, did not have a strong lobby to do that all. And unlike the Ukrainians, who right now are basically leading the information war, they have a lot of Twitter accounts sharing detailed information, photographs, videos, and so on. At the time, the Bosnians did not have this kind of materials.
This was before the internet, before smartphones, so people could not do unless some major TV, channel came to Bosnia and recorded that. It was basically
and it was hard to bring over Western journalists because nobody actually believed that these camps existed. Everybody thought that this was Bosnian propaganda at the time. So it was very difficult to even get some Western journalists to come and visit the camps.
Yeah. So I just want to share this screen for everybody. This is the Time magazine cover that became famous or infamous, where for the first time after the World War II, after the Holocaust, after the Nazi concentration camps, you have in Europe the situation where you have barbed wire and people in camps behind the barbed wire and being starved and being tortured and humiliated, as you already mentioned. So for those who are not familiar with the history of the war, this was an emblematic picture that changed quite a bit. As you said, many of these camps were closed down or significantly reduced because of the fact that they were discovered and that some of the Western journalists finally gained access to them and took pictures and even recorded. We have some recordings as well. So tell us from a researcher perspective, you did say that it wasn't always easy to find documentary evidence, right? So you basically had to, as a detective, look at what happened after or with the remnants of what happened and sort of reconstruct all of that, talk to the survivors. Obviously, there are many people who are witnesses to this. But in terms of documentary evidence, what were you able to find and what you wanted to find but you couldn't, if you could maybe tell us?
Yeah, so luckily I had access to the ICTY archives. This is the International Criminal Court for the former Yugoslavia, the Hague Tribunal, basically, which tried all the major Serb perpetrators in The Hague. And I managed to get my hands onto a large number of these documents, which I had to screen through. So basically, this was a very time-consuming. For example, the Karčić case, I went through almost 11,000 documents, searching for keywords related to the camp, trying to reconstruct the establishment of each and every camp and the similarities there according to the perpetrator documentation. In relation to survivor testimony, I used ICTY again, the International Criminal Court of the former Yugoslavia, because they had very good testimony, which was cross-examined, which was established. So, tomorrow nobody can say this is, some new witness that you found somewhere in the streets and things like that. So I use very concrete court evidence in order to reconstruct and write the history of the camps. And thirdly, reports from the court hearings themselves. A lot of the evidence which is presented in the courts does not end up in the judgment itself. So a lot of the local testimonies from the local courts, I used court hearings and court reports from the trials. And so in the total, while writing the book, I used around 56 different judgments from local courts and from the ICTY. So the whole entire research is basically court evidence and perpetrator documentation, which was used.
Thank you. Did you directly interview any of the survivors of the camps, or was it something you wanted to avoid in order to reduce some accusations of bias?
I intentionally did not want to interview anybody. The reason for this is that when I researched witness testimonies from the war and what I realized was that, due to the time which is gone, passed by 30 years, a lot of the memory has either people become forgetful, people start confusing dates, especially with elderly survivors and so on. So that's why I didn't want to. I wanted to evade any chance of getting some facts wrong. So that's why I used the documentation which they gave to courts earlier on. So that's why I evaded direct interviews with camp survivors. Although I spent a lot of time and I have a lot of personal friends who were in the camps, and I spent a lot of time talking to them. But for the purpose of writing the book itself and for citing it, I use documentation which can be double checked in the court. So that was the intentional part.
Yeah, thank you. So in order to run such a network of camps and with the number of detainees that were there, they must have had scores of guards and police officers and other people who served in those camps on the Serb side. How many of those had actually met justice? How many of them had been prosecuted? And how many are still at loose or alive, if you will?
Well, I mean, to be honest, a very small number has been prosecuted. So from each camp, you have maybe one or two average, one or two people in average who has been. It's very hard to convict a person for for crimes which they committed 30 years ago for several reasons. Firstly, it's very hard to establish who was where at what time, and to what extent can you really recognize a person from 40 years ago. So the Bosnian courts and the ICTY place a really high level of degree of evidence and seriousness in dealing with evidence and with the testimony. So it's very hard to try somebody and to testify against somebody for crimes committed. In other cases, you have witnesses who did not want to testify. The amount of crimes which they survived was so cruel to that extent that they never wanted to face their perpetrators. And also, you have a lot of people who left Bosnia sometime during the war. They went to the US, they went to Australia, and they've never come back. They just wanted to cut off all ties with Bosnia, and start living a new life. Because and this is to some extent very understandable. When you have that amount of sexual abuse in camps or humiliation, and you're talking about small communities where you had a very condensed community where you knew what your neighbor had for breakfast, basically, things like that, and all of a sudden that community is broken up, and you end up somewhere in
and that was exactly
Missouri.
The objective, right? To make it that way so people wouldn't come back.
Exactly. The aim of this collective traumatization is to discuss your hometown to that extent that you never want to return back. That's exactly what happened, and I must say that the Bosnian Serbs were very, very successful in this, because the demographic changes which you can see later on are shocking. The amount
that was going to be my next question, so let's go into that immediately. So what was the outcome of these systematic policies by the Bosnian Serb forces, and how did they change Bosnia, especially in those areas where these camps were established?
So in cases where, like in Višegrad, where you had more than 10,000 Bosniaks living in 1991, in 1997 you had three people living in the town. All in all, 3 people. That was just a very good illustration of to what extent the population was cleansed from these municipalities. So these demographic changes were very drastic, very quick, and very brutal. And the people who returned back afterwards are mainly elderly people, many people who, there's no chance for these communities to regenerate, actually. So you have this small. If you look at the pictures from Ramadan, from Tarawih prayers or whatever, you can see a small number of people inside the mosques, mainly elderly people or young people who come over the weekend to their villages or towns. And basically these areas in the next 10, 20 years will be totally empty of Muslims, because these people pass away who have returned back. So in the long run, this strategy and this strategy of collective traumatization will be very successful in the next year.
I'm sorry, I was muted for a second. So unfortunately, as I said, I would like to invite our audience, our online audience, to type their questions or comments in the chat box on YouTube. And while they are doing so, I just want to ask you one pretty much final question in our discussion, and that is, what are the main takeaways or conclusions of the book, both from the point of view of the book's contribution to the study of this, the methodology that maybe you developed, the theories, so from the academic side, and then the main takeaways from the outcome of all of this, and what are the lessons that could be learned from this experience?
Well, the main takeaway is that perpetrators learn from each other. So basically, if you look from in the book, I give a short history of camps throughout history, And you can see that basically each perpetrator throughout history learns from each other. And in the case of Bosnia, one of the local commanders, one of the local politicians in 1992 said to a Western journalist, if Hitler and Stalin could have camps, why can't we? So basically, that shows that even these local politicians knew very well their history, knew the effects of camps, knew what these camps were going to produce, and this whole idea of never again basically is not true. Even in the case of Bosnia, when you talk about at each commemoration and each Srebrenica memorial commemoration, you can always hear the topic about never again, never happening this to anybody again, and so on. But in the meantime, we have things going on, not only in Ukraine but in the Rohingyas, the Uyghurs, and so on. And you don't have a lot of reactions from these people whatsoever. So the main takeaway is that all of these camps which existed in Bosnia during this time were well organized, were conducted by police mainly, the tortures, the killings, and so on, by members of the reserve police force. This happened on a very local level, local personal, I dare to say, level. And this is something which is still going on. So you have the people who committed these crimes work in the police service, work in military, members of senior members of political parties. So these people who took part in these crimes are right now in power. And of course, they are the ones who are staggering Bosnia's path forward towards NATO integrations, towards EU, towards prosperity in total. So in this book, what I wanted to show was that mainly to shed light on 1992, because a lot of the focus was on So in this way, I think I managed to shift, at least shed some light on 1992, and to show, and this is something which I'm proud of. I wanted to give each victim a space. So each victim who I mentioned inside, I wanted to somehow give credit to them, to give them a sort of memory for eternity, and also to memorialize the perpetrators. The names of the perpetrators are fully mentioned inside. So in this way, it's a history of the camps, which can be double checked by whoever wants to double check it. So that's why I focus a lot on the externally, entirely on the court cases. And yes, so what we can see today is that this level of humiliation, torture, trauma is something which you can see very well with the Uyghurs as well. And I dare to say that to some extent, the collective traumatization could be seen, although more research needs to be done. In the case of the Uyghurs, we don't have enough information right now. What we do know is that there's a genocide going on there, and so on. But I think it will take a couple of years until we get enough information in order to write a complete history of the camps in China.
Yeah, it's a sober reminder too of the fact that in this case, you could say the crime pays. That the Serbian leadership might have expected that some of these might be discovered, that some of their perpetrators will end up in jail, in prison for their war crimes, but they probably thought that that's the price they were willing to pay, because if what they're getting is a significant chunks of Bosnia completely ethnically cleansed from the Bosnian Muslim population, combined with the fact that they have now full political control over those areas. And the downside is that a few people are going to end up in jail for that. That is a cold-blooded, you could say, criminal calculation, but it's the one that in the end shows that it's profitable in many ways, and it's very sad. I'm glad that you also brought up the examples of Rohingya and the Uyghurs, but we also have an emerging situation in India, for instance, where many of the similar tactics that were employed by the Serbs in Bosnia are being used by the Hindutva nationalists in India against the Muslim population of India. So I definitely can see a very high relevance of your research in your book. Unfortunately, one wishes to live in a world in which this wouldn't be relevant at all. But everything points to the fact that it's actually more relevant today than it was 30 years ago when these things happened. And so I'm really glad that you wrote this book, and I really congratulate you. We have our audience in waiting, so I would like to strongly recommend them, urge them to type their questions or comments in the chat section of YouTube. I also have an announcement to make, and that is that if you go to the link, to the publisher's link that I shared in the chat at the beginning of this conversation, you'll find that this book is currently an open access book. So you can actually download the book for free, right, Hikmet?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, they should be able to download the book for free. So that is our Ramadan gift to you by way of University of Michigan Press. I think it's quite remarkable. You're based in Sarajevo, you're based in Bosnia. You managed to get a contract and publish the book with a major university press in the United States. And I think that in and of itself points to the high level of quality of research in your book. Maybe if you wanted to maybe mention a thing or two about the whole book publication process. This is a book talk after all. And maybe tell us a little bit how it is to be writing a book in Bosnia and publishing from Bosnia and publishing here in the United States.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I'm happy the book is out because it has been a really long process. So I submitted the manuscript sometime in January 2019, and then I got the anonymous feedback from the reviewers sometime in late 2020. And then I had to address some questions inside the positive thing is that I got two positive reviews. That's really great. My editors told me that this was a very rare case where you got two reviews in the beginning. So there were only some one major change in one chapter, and the rest were very minor changes. So basically, since then I've been working on getting this well situated, and of course double checking all the sources, getting the index done and everything else. But overall, it's a long process, but it's a very educational one. When you mention that it's Michigan University of Michigan Press, you get some sort of level of respect from fellow scholars and so on. And of course, you have this. I think we spoke about this several times. You have this level of uncertainty from Western scholars, both Muslim and non-Muslim, when they look at scholars in Bosnia, because we are on a much, let's say, we're a bit isolated from Western academia, to be honest. But there are a couple of young scholars here in Bosnia who do very serious work, very good work, different topics, and I think this is a new generation of people who are going to be publishing more and more in the West, and getting our voice heard. Because, as I mentioned earlier, I know I'm getting a bit off topic, but when I mentioned earlier the similarities and differences between Ukraine and Bosnia, in 1982 you didn't have a lot of Bosnian scholars who could go on air on CNN talking English, and Bosnia and so on. Today it's a very different situation. Today we have Bosnian scholars who can write, who can talk, who can lobby for Bosnia, for the truth, and everything else. And hopefully my aim was to have this book, and coincidentally it's coming out on the 30th anniversary of the beginning of the war and the beginning of camps and so on. I'm hoping that this book will be a sort of basis for a lot of people to use in their classes, in their teachings and so on. And I'm happy to say that a lot of my colleagues at different genocide and Holocaust centers have already said that they were going to use this book for for additional readings and for lectures and so on. And this is a way of how to spread truth about. And you wouldn't be able to do this if you had a local Bosnian publisher. You don't get that reach basically without doing this. So this is a very long process, very tiring process, but I think it will be a very fruitful one in the long run.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I think a lot of people outside the academia do not always have a full understanding of how tedious the process of publishing an academic book is, that it takes several years, even after you had finished writing it, to get it to the point where it is ready to be published, because you have peer review, you have professional editing, you have university presses that obviously stake their reputation online, and they want to make sure that, especially when it comes to very sensitive subjects like this one, that everything is well documented and everything is well researched. So it's a long process, and so definitely a great achievement. I think if something that could be learned also from this is that self-representation matters, that it is the researchers in Bosnia, I think, and conversely in many other places where such things are happening, that really will document what has happened and that will present this history to the rest of the world. Like you said, at the beginning of the aggression in Bosnia in 1992, there were very few who could even speak English and speak to the international population. There are thousands and thousands today all over the world. The unfortunate side effect of ethnic cleansing and genocide is that people disperse all over the world. So while we are waiting, and we have a few minutes left for our conversation, waiting to hear from our audience and to see if there are any questions or comments, I want to ask you, what is your next research project? What are you currently working on? Is it related to this at all, or something completely different?
Right now, my focus is on far-right groups in Bosnia and on the role of Russia and other countries in their influence on these groups, and also on the current political situation in Bosnia. So that's one project, and another project is on the Roma genocide in Bosnia during the Second World War. So basically, these are two different, smaller, parallel projects which I'm currently doing. So I'm trying to get a bit of rest from these very difficult topics. I'm right now dealing with the far right.
Yeah, I think it's quite indicative that you mentioned you're trying to get rest. Researching a topic like this must be emotionally draining. And again, since this is a book talk and we're talking, to a wide variety of audiences, but our primary audience is academic audience, maybe you tell us a little bit about the toll that researching and writing a book like this takes on a researcher and the writer.
No, it's definitely emotionally very hard to write such a book, especially when you have to read a lot of witness accounts on torture, on abuse, on rape, especially these personal family stories of torture and so on. In some cases, since my family roots are from Višegrad, when you come across a name or a person or family who you know and so on, it's very difficult actually to work on such a topic, but that makes it much more important to make it accessible to Western audience. So all in all, it leaves, I think, definitely some sort of secondary trauma in the long run for the researchers. And not only that, I spoke recently to a doctor who told me that right now he has a lot of cases of prosecutors and judges work in the local Bosnian courts who have secondary trauma due to the level of witness reports which they are hearing from witness reports. So, and this is 30 years from the end of the war. So this topic definitely leaves a person not only emotionally drained but also very disappointed in humanity.
Yeah. And so the traumatization that you're talking about is collective in that it's also intergenerational too, right? So with that being said, and on this somber note, I would like us to conclude our conversation. Our goal was to conclude it in about an hour, and it's been exactly an hour. So I thank all of our audience that has been with us. Thank you for your participation. Dr. Karčić, thank you for writing this book, for sharing it with us, and for talking to us today. This is going to be on YouTube, so feel free to share it later on with anybody. And I think it was a great conversation to have. Once again, thank you for coming, joining us online. And we hope to maybe in future have you over here in Virginia to come and visit us and maybe give a few talks in person as well.
Sure. Thank you so much for organizing this book talk. I really appreciate it.
You're most welcome. This was Dr. Hikmet Karčić, the author of the latest book on the Bosnian Serb camp system. That book's titled Torture, Humiliate, Kill. It is published by the University of Michigan Press. It is available for as an open access for free download. Once again, thank you all. Assalamu alaikum and all the best.